Hey, this is Sports Slaw with Lomas Brown, the pro.
And Deb Schneider, I'm the prof. And together, we're the pro and the prof.
I try not to, there. One thing I do too. It's at 60 episodes, right? Well, I mean, we're approaching 60, and every time it comes on, man, it's just.
I just hope our listeners laugh too.
I know. Oh, Ray says it's 62. This is number 62.
62.
Yeah.
62.
So it's been eventful, Deb. It seems like when we come on here, and it seems like nothing changed. We try to do it weekly. Sometimes we aren't able to do it weekly. But even when we come on a weekly basis, it just seems like things are changing daily in this world. I mean, from one crisis to another crisis, it just seems like it's something always going on.
It is. And it's so interesting because we rarely talk about who hit what home run or who scored. That's not what this is about. And we have a lot to talk about with COVID, and that's continuing a year and a half later. But they're also I almost want to call them manufactured crises.
Yes.
Name, image, likeness is one of those.
Yes.
NCAA transfer portal.
Yes.
How we're dealing with that. Heisman voting. I mean,
I mean, you're right. You're right. The national championships are coming up. Baseball with their lockout. You're right. I mean, even the NBA now, they're talking about some of the cases that they're getting, COVID cases that they're getting. And of course, the NFL, they're just a mess right now with the number of cases that's going on with that. So you're right. It's just always something going on, and it's flows, it's flowing, it's fluid because it changes so fast.
It really does. And today I read that we have met another COVID milestone, 800,000 deaths. 800,000 deaths.
Wow.
So I know that is amazing. So we felt that on a day like today, it would be good to bring back Doc Rodney Rohde, just to talk to us. He is from Texas State University, our favorite epidemiologist, public health expert. And I'm really, really proud to announce Regent's professor in Texas.
Yes, that's awesome.
39 in the entire state of Texas. That is so great.
Plus, he's a cool dad too. He is a cool dad.
He's a cool dad, and he has a new son-in-law of Saturday.
Yes.
So congratulations all around, Doc.
Yes, Doc.
Thanks so much, guys. Thanks for having me back on the show. It's one of my favorite shows to be on. And it's surreal in both the areas of being named a Regent's professor and becoming the father of a bride. It is, two honors that rival anything I've ever done. Just an amazing weekend, an amazing month, and but in the face of the pandemic and other things going on, kind of keeping things in perspective as well. So you mentioned some milestones that we can comment on today. It's the 800,000 deaths is something that I don't know if you guys know this. I was looking at the information yesterday. So if you look from June of this year till about right now, 100,000 of those deaths have been after vaccination. That saddens me.
Wow.
20,000 in Texas. Texas is a big chunk of that, 1/5 of that. So what I'm saying is that we have lots of people that still need to get vaccinated and protect themselves because it's preventable, especially mortality is preventable. So we're still fighting that issue in the United States and elsewhere to get people vaccinated.
Yeah. So, Doc, just on that subject, why do you think that? Why do you think we've seen 100,000 deaths from people that, and you're saying these are people that were vaccinated.
No,
am I correct? They
unvaccinated.
weren't. Gotcha. Okay, I got you. Yeah. Yeah, I know. I mean, that's the biggest thing. And here in Michigan, Doc, I mean, I think they said in Detroit, only 30-something% of the people are vaccinated in Detroit. So you see, we're so far behind. And of course, we were one of the hot spots for this Omicron, this new one. We're one of the hot spots for it, but yet and still we can't get the message out to people. Don't seem like we could get the message out to people that they need to get vaccinated. And it's puzzling. It's just really, truly is puzzling why people won't go get their shots.
Yeah, and maybe it's just a good time for me to just maybe update you guys on where we're kind of standing. If you like, if you don't mind, I might take a few minutes just to do that, just to get your audience up to date. So, so everybody knows the story of the last 2 weeks or so, 2 or 3 weeks, has been the new Omicron variant that originated in South Africa. Although, as I tell many people, viruses often lag in detection because people can be traveling all over the world as a virus is incubating in a person, for example. So, at backtracking, there's actually been some findings of that virus maybe in Europe and elsewhere. So again, South Africa kind of got tagged, and it's probably one of the origins, but it is something epidemiologists always kind of try to remind people that we should be really careful about trying to kind of put a virus on a geographic locale, because it really jumps all over the world. But it is here. As of today, I believe, CDC has made the commentary and the data that 33 states have detected Omicron, including Washington, D.C. I think WHO mentioned yesterday that at least 50 countries have reported Omicron. And again, for the audience, the way we know this is through something called genomic surveillance. So there are laboratory tests that tell us if you're just positive or negative with any form of SARS-CoV-2, which causes the disease COVID, but the different types, the cousins, the different variants that pop up, you have to use something called genomic sequencing. So you get into the DNA to kind of figure it out. The good news, some of the good news, at least right now, remember this is very early. So you hear this from all the experts right now. It's very early. We try not to do too black and white on answers, but early data is showing that this variant is very much more transmissible, perhaps, than Delta. But if we're fortunate, it may not be as deadly. And again, this is early. This is early information, but so far it's looking like it may not be as deadly as some of the other forms. In a weird kind of way, and some experts are talking about this, we probably will have, and I agree, we'll probably have 2 variants circulating in the U.S. in 2022 coming forward. So as quickly as it's kind of popped up in 33 states, I'm sure at some point it's probably going to outpace Delta. And this is what viruses do, by the way. They kind of, it's called competitive pressure. So at some point that virus, the Omicron variant, will kind of start pressuring, and Delta, you may see it less and less. But both can cause illness. Delta is still the primary issue around morbidity and mortality. Lomas was mentioning just a second ago about Michigan. Michigan is a state I've been watching closely. Mm-hmm. Their healthcare systems are being overwhelmed. And you guys know that I'm passionate about this, whether it's nursing or medical laboratory professionals or physicians or respiratory care professionals. We're just exhausted after 2 full years of this. And so that vaccination piece that Lomas brought up is so incredibly important. Even if you're not really on board with all of the science around it, try to get on board with helping healthcare professionals, because people are absolutely just quitting, burnt out and tired over this type of constant workload. So that's kind of where we are with Omicron. We did tip the 800,000 mortality rate this week. And it, again, this is something we've talked about on your show before. It kind of makes me wonder if this is what it like when my dad was dealing with Vietnam and being on television. It's like we're just become numb to the numbers. It's, 1,000 deaths a day, guys. 1,000 deaths a day are still happening. 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s of thousands of cases a day, sometimes as much as 100,000 new cases a day. So it has not gone away. And it really has become a pandemic of mortality for the unvaccinated. We're still seeing cases in the vaccinated. There's breakthrough infections and things like that, but they absolutely are not part of the death and severe illness and being put on ventilators and things like that. So it's truly about the unvaccinated right now.
Yeah. That seems to be a question that I see a lot. And that is, I'm getting an echo, I apologize. That is, how many vaccinated people are passing away or are hospitalized because of this? And a lot of people are saying, well, it just doesn't matter. And I've had healthcare professionals look at me and say, I need to get a waiver for religious reasons or for, health reasons. And it always kind of makes me wonder, because you're in healthcare, you're seeing this.
Yeah. Yeah. We also
want to say it matters.
It does matter. It does. Yeah, it does matter. To me, it matters. You guys know where I stand on this. For me, and again, we've been in this area before, but for me, it's always about thinking about others. And certainly if you're in a field like healthcare, the military, those who are kind of there to protect other people, and really you're at risk because you're in that realm of so much disease and infection. So you certainly don't want to be asymptomatic carrier and passing it on to other immunocompromised patients. So to me, and ultimately, again, I back up, and we kind of know what we're getting into. If you're signing up for a healthcare degree and you're going through, 3, 5, 7, 10, 12 years to become a doctor, a nurse, a medical lab person, you kind of know what you're getting into. So it's not like you didn't have a choice. And so it's difficult. But we love America because of our freedoms, but sometimes we forget that community health can supersede that individual freedom. To me, it's again, Rodney Rhodey, not Texas State. I just think it's important that people think about others, whether you're a healthcare professional or an NFL player, for that matter. So that's just me. And I think a lot of people feel that way and others don't. And so that's where we're at in the country. But I just keep hoping with time. And the data is just overwhelming at this point. There was some questions, a year ago as we kind of went into it, but it's just overwhelming how vaccinated people are better off, and now boosted. Boosting is important because antibodies are waning after about 6 months. So get your booster if you haven't done it and you're eligible to kind of go into the winter and to be protected. But I it's hard for me to answer. It's frustrating, and it's just so frustrating for us who do this every day. But hopefully, with ongoing data and maybe over time, we'll get those that are on the fence, and so that we start reaching higher levels of protection.
Yeah, Doc, I know at one point contact tracing was big. That's all you would hear about. People that go back to find out who you were around and everything, but you don't hear contact tracing as much as you did in the beginning of this pandemic, or when it was at its point. Is it still just as important as it was back in the beginning for contact tracing?
It really is, and I really appreciate you bringing that up, Lomas. Testing and trying to control many outbreaks, whether it's a classroom or the boardroom or wherever we're at, is really still important. It's just gotten to the point, unfortunately, where it's so, I think, overwhelming. The data is so overwhelming that people just kind of feel like they either feel like we're okay, we've been vaccinated, so I don't need to worry about it anymore, or the opposite, I'm tired of it, and they're just not either reporting it or they're not testing. And so, it's public health 101, test and then try to limit the spread of the transmission. But it is difficult at this point. We're up against that kind of apathy, I think, with respect to just knowing, what's going on with a particular person. I think the only place you really see it now is probably within healthcare, maybe within educational institutions, if they have a way to kind of determine someone who's positive and maybe hold them out of classes and things like that, and then travel. Because you have to have that testing done to travel. And it's become a little more rigid again, as we were talking about before the show with Omicron. Suddenly we kind of see a reemphasis on testing again, especially as you're entering or exiting countries. So I think you'll see it there. But just in, Joe and Mary public here in the United States or wherever, in middle America or wherever you're at, I don't know. I don't know if people are really taking it as seriously as they should be. And so again, it is very important, but we're just probably not doing it as well as we should.
I think you're exactly right. We're tired of it.
Yeah.
And those of us who've been vaccinated and boosted, we're good.
Yeah.
No problems. And there's certainly a definite split. Some of it's political, some of it's healthcare, but there's a definite split in the country. I want to turn this, since it is sports law, to looking at that in the world of sports, because we have basically 3 out of the 4 major sports leagues right now have potential problems with this, and the 4th being Major League Baseball, and they're on a lockout, so they don't have any problems right now that are related to COVID. That's for the later on. That was a joke, by the way. But we've got, Ray was telling us 36 NFL players, 25 on active rosters, 11 on practice squads placed in the COVID-19 protocol. Okay. We have all these positive tests come out. We have Aaron Rodgers. We have Antonio Brown. We've got people.
We just got Amari Cooper back for the Cowboys, right?
Oh, that's right.
Yeah.
Right.
It's an ongoing issue, right? I think the NFL is a slice of America, and
absolutely.
And it's unfortunate. We're all sports fans, and certainly we remember talking about this a year ago. They're right on top of each other and doing different things, and so whether they're getting vaccinated or not, whether they're being honest or not, all of these things have an impact on corporation level events and finances and people's careers. And you guys know I'm a Cowboys fan, and we felt it when Amari Cooper was out. You could see the change in the makeup of that team. So, whether it's a quarterback or someone who's really handling the ball, but it doesn't matter. People in the trenches matter just as well. Games are won there. So it's a shame. Again, let's go back to community health. You could take a football team that's, Lomas knows the numbers. Maybe 100 people with everybody involved or so. And it's kind of like you're relying on each other to do your very best, including your health, so that the team moves forward. And that means from the top to the bottom. And it starts affecting the team. So an NFL team, a classroom, a hospital, they are microcosms of transmission. And when it happens in one place, it can happen in the other. We are not, the virus does not care what you're doing unless you are protecting yourself. So
Doc, let me jump in right there with you on that one. So now we know that the Omicron is more transmissible, right? Than the other variant. So how will the NFL, how can they combat that? Because we know people that get vaccinated, they could still get it, right? So how will they be able, like you said, they're on top of each other, we're breathing on each other, we're swapping bodily fluids. How can they get this under control? How will they be able to get this under control if this new variant is more transmissible? And like you say, even being vaccinated, you could still get this. How will they be able to do that?
Yeah, one word, it's still vaccination. Even though we can get breakthrough transmission, breakthrough infections with vaccinated individuals, it's a way lower number than those who are unvaccinated. So vaccination is the best tool we have. barring full mask wearing, which is not going to probably happen during games and things like that. So vaccination is still our best answer. Omicron, Delta, Alpha, Beta, whatever else comes along down the road, vaccination right now is still the answer. It could change down the road, but I doubt it. I mean, there's really no other tool that helps prevent it other than physical distancing and, wearing a mask and kind of staying to yourself. So that's not going to happen in team sports. So it looks like the country, unless something interesting happens or devastating happens, that we are all going to accept sports. And I'm okay with that, with safety measures. I mean, I think we're seeing that we can live in this world of COVID-19. It's just unfortunate that more people won't take the protective measures around vaccination and things like that, because I think what you're seeing right now, bringing it back to the players, is really what's happening is it's probably an indication of what happened over the last, remember, this is always a lagging indicator. So it's probably going back to Thanksgiving and kind of moving forward. We had a ton of mixing, like we had before. People kind of forget this, but it's really the same old story. People mix over holidays. We're going to be worried about the Super Bowl in February because everybody's kind of doing their own thing again with travels and holidays. And if you're not vaccinated and you're doing this, odds are you are going to get COVID-19 at some point, whether you're young and healthy, elderly and frail, or a newborn. At some point, this virus is going to find you if you're not vaccinated. And it might find you if you are vaccinated, but it's, again, less likely you're going to have any trouble with it. So vaccination and then doing all the other mitigation measures are going to be important. But man, who would have thought, a year ago, 18 months ago, that we might be talking about how teams, it affects everything. Prediction of wins. It affects gambling. It affects everything. Like,
and we want to gamble.
All of a sudden, Dak Prescott is out. It changes the whole dynamic. So it'll be an ongoing story, I think.
One of the things that, just play devil's advocate for a second here. Pandemics generally last 2.5 to 4 years. I think we all thought we were better than the Spanish pandemic of 1918 because we had a vaccination and we had a vaccine. And I think when we look back at all the pandemics throughout history, and they've happened, at some point it's over. Do you think that the vaccine is actually helping us? I guess my question here is, I've been thinking that perhaps the vaccine is helping reduce deaths, but not necessarily the time of the pandemic. Am I? Yeah,
I think that's a at least partially accurate answer. I mean, it's hard. It's hard.
Partially accurate from the Regent professor. Yes.
We'll give you some partial credit.
Partial credit.
But all joking aside, it's really difficult to know because you're looking at two different eras. 1918, no antibiotics. Most people were dying of bacterial pneumonia, not influenza. Influenza was the problem, but then they would get secondary bacterial pneumonia and you couldn't treat it. People were dying of bacterial pneumonia, as well as you had no therapies, you had no vaccine at that time. And so that lasted about 3-ish years. And again, people will argue and experts will argue about what you kind of define as a pandemic time frame. Generally, you're looking at mortality and morbidity reaching levels that kind of go back to the normal levels. And then it typically becomes endemic, which means it's at lower levels. It's going to always be there. I think this is I'm pretty sure most of us agree this is probably what's going to happen with COVID, that at some point it'll become, more or less like a flu or other viruses that circulate at different times of the year, and we live with it in a sense. Hopefully people are getting vaccinated over time. That becomes better, and you have lower and lower and lower mortality. But some people do play that devil's advocate and ask the question, would we be better off? And I think we've mentioned it on this show before. It's sometimes called taking the hit.
Yep.
But I think where where I would disagree with that is that taking the hit could mean, I mean, influenza killed a third of the world's population in 1918. I mean, we haven't gotten there.
Right, because we have vaccines.
That's right. Although I did see today on just a quick line that came across this morning, 1 in 100 of every American senior has died so far, which doesn't sound like a lot, but it is a lot of people, especially if you're an older person. That kind of starts adding up. So I think, that's kind of my take on it, is that we are way better off than we were in 1918, just from healthcare, all the things we have in our toolbox now to kind of treat. What's going to be, I think, problematic, and again, we just don't know the answer, is long COVID, people that have survived it. We may see ongoing problems with this for decades that we just can't predict right now. Much like HIV, we're still seeing the devastation of HIV 20, 30 years later. So it's just hard to know. And people can make those arguments, and I understand them. But ultimately, I think helping people not to die is our priority, ultimately. So that's why most of us advocate for vaccination.
Yeah. Right. I just want to play the devil's advocate, because I know a lot of people are saying, oh, I don't need to get vaccinated. It's going to go away anyways. Well, you're more likely to die or get somebody else sick.
Right. I mean, it is truly gambling with your life. It really is. People can say they're young and healthy, but we have seen time and again, story after story. It's not hundreds and hundreds of thousands of people, but it will kill people that are young and healthy and thought they were going to be fine. And then you see these horrible, stories that they left behind 4 children and a wife, and they were, on their deathbed still advocating for not getting vaccinated. It just blows my mind, but I can't get into the psyche of those people. I just have no understanding of that.
Yeah. So my question to Deb is, again, and I think I might have asked you before about this. I mean, could we see future lawsuits come out of this? I mean, do you think an individual that's playing a team sport that say might have got vaccinated, and maybe some of his teammates that didn't, and they ended up catching it and say having long-term effects from it, can they turn around and, kind of blame the league or kind of blame the team that they were with because they didn't force guys to get vaccinated, or they didn't put in rules to make teammates or active players get vaccinated? Could we see lawsuits coming from this?
I think we've got the potential, and I think the game has changed with Delta and with Omicron, because we initially thought, oh, get vaccinated, everything's going to be fine, right? That was the thing. Everything's going to be fine. We don't, we can take off the masks. Now we're tired of it. Now we're not being vaccinated because of whatever reason, or, we've got these new variants out there that are hitting, I mean, I had COVID. I'm vaccinated, I'm boosted, and I had it. Mm-hmm. And it was a few sniffles here and there. It wasn't a big deal for me, but I was vaccinated, right? But I think that one of the big issues is, I know I've seen Gus Kenworthy, who's a skier, mogul, a rather famous skier, and he said he went to do his routine after he had COVID, and he got what's the equivalent in skiing of the twisties, which is what Simone Biles had. He says, I don't know when I can get back. And I don't know. Lomas, have you seen any players who have lingering effects? Because even if you're vaccinated, you can have lingering effects, can't you?
Yeah. I mean, Doc R, remember Cam Newton? When he came back, he was saying he was like in a fog there, like for weeks after that. I know Lamar Jackson, so we have seen some guys that had the lingering effects. Now, I don't know about the heart, the heart problem.
The myocarditis?
I don't know about that. But I do know fogginess these guys had. They were low on energy. A lot of, like you said, trying to get back in the routine of what they did. It just seems to be a lot harder for those guys that had COVID. And, so but I hadn't seen the real serious. Not to say that the fogginess and all the other things aren't real serious, but I haven't heard about anything about the heart yet. I don't know about you, Doc, if you've heard anything about any players, college or, professional.
I really haven't. I mean, that's the kind of, I think, studies that are probably ongoing right now, looking at all sorts of segments of populations. There's so much data as we go through this that I'm sure you're going to start seeing those types of papers and peer-reviewed reports coming out in the coming, year. Look, you already see that. So if you kind of follow, you can literally follow CDC or other types of sites that release different published reports and published papers. And I'm reading these all the time. There's so much out there looking, whether it's at, newborns or pre-K or teenagers. And then they're looking at immunocompromised individuals. They're looking at the military, sporting and things like that. So at some point, I think we'll start trying to understand what's going on with those areas. But it's just, and people hate hearing this, and I hate saying it, we just don't know all the etiology, the root cause of some of these long COVID issues, why some people are totally fine, like Deb, whether they're vaccinated or not. Some people are totally fine. Others seem to have ongoing problems with myocarditis, with a multi-inflammatory system, which tends to be more involved with children, massive lung issues where they can't get their wind back and they can't compete as well. And some that are just some really sad stories. If you see some cases of people that 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 months later are in a fog, as you said, they're not mentally back. They can't walk to their place of work and back without being exhausted. So it's a viral etiology, I think, that's going to take a lot of core research to kind of figure out what's happening, because it's obviously different for different people. So we just don't have any indications of why it's not ripping through everybody. That would almost in some senses be easier if everybody was dealing with the same illness and pathology, but it's just all over the place. It's really diabolical. I mean, in a sense, it's been a very nasty, it's not playing well with others. It's just, It's difficult to understand. And thankfully, again, we do have some tools that help. But that long COVID stuff is interesting because a lot of times people get out of the hospital even and they're kind of back and they're recovering, and then all of a sudden they relapse. And so we just don't know. We just don't know those answers yet.
Right. And so to answer your question, Lomas, which I realized I did not answer, I think that, yeah, we could see some if we combine the idea of contact tracing it's very difficult to bring a lawsuit if you don't know about a disease or something, if you don't know where you got it. Because if that player didn't see anybody else and was completely isolated, and I don't think there's any one player who would be that, and they didn't go home to their wives, and we were talking about, would you want to be isolated? Would you really want to be in that bubble? And so if you're in the bubble and you can prove that, yes, through contact tracing, this is where I got it. And that probably talks about some of the genetic sequencing and all of that to say this is where it is. That's beyond that. I don't know how you can bring necessarily a lawsuit against a particular organization.
Yeah. I mean, I would never dive into the law and take on the prof on that topic. But
I try biology all the time.
But I would assume if like there are some cases, I guess, and maybe you have insight into that. Like if it was intentional, that's a whole different story. But
right. But then you have that cause and effect.
Right.
We don't have that. I think another area that's really interesting and that Ray has pointed out is immigration law in sports, because we have the NHL and NBA who play in Canada. So how do we get our players there? Because Canada has different laws and rules on vaccination. We know Tyler Bertuzzi can't play in Canada. He's not vaccinated. And even though most of the players are, that's a big deal. We also have certain cities, New York City, you have to be vaccinated. What do you think about about that? Is that something that we can deal with or handle?
It's.
I ask these open-ended questions because I like to see both of you shake your heads.
I mean, how would you on Earth deal with an immigration law? I mean, does it get into a person's right to earn an income? I mean, it's just so interesting. And even in the U.S., right? I mean, we have these cities like New York and other places that are cracking down. I don't know. I mean, I guess it will end up in the courts because it seems like everything wants to end up in the courts these days, whether it's the military. I saw today 27 Air Force individuals have now been released.
Yep.
Their duty. I'm sure we're going to see something about that. We're seeing all these, again, it kind of saddens me to see things end up in the courts. I remember when we first got to know each other and we were talking about none of us want mandates. We want this to be voluntary and people doing this for protection. And we certainly don't want people doing it if they have true medical reasons not to be protective. And I've even talked to people about, worst case scenario, why can't we, if we're not going to have people, if we have people that are not going to be vaccinated through whatever reason, then we absolutely need an alternative like testing. And I mean testing constantly. And if they don't like that, then that becomes a problem for me. If you're not going to get vaccinated and you're in healthcare, for example, then you need to be tested daily because you could be an asymptomatic carrier. And perhaps you must wear a mask at that point and or not be able to work until you're negative again. But that seems like a lot of headache to me versus, a vaccination and just moving on. But that's where we're at. There are people willing to die on that hill, obviously, and it's showing up in the court. It really saddens me because it just seems like to me, and I'm not I am not that legal person like the prof is, but it seems like a ton of wasted effort and time of something that can be prevented. In my common understanding of things, it just seems like, why are we tying all this stuff up in a court when we should be spending more time on prevention and helping people? But I don't know. It's so frustrating.
Yeah, no, I agree 100% with you. And again, you talk about the testing. I know that's one of the things that the NFL, I mean, they're making these guys, sometimes they test a couple of times throughout the day. Now, I don't know which test they're using, Doc. I don't know if they're using the fast 15-minute PBR or whatever they call that. I'm not really sure. I don't know which one, but I do know unvaccinated players got a whole different routine from the vaccinated players on teams. And again, that requires them to be tested. And even I think the rule is they have to be clear. I know they're testing on Saturday nights. For example, when the Lions got into Denver this weekend, they had to stay up. Some of their personnel, Deb, had to stay up to 10:45, which was 1:45 Detroit back on this time because they had to get tested. They weren't allowed to leave the rooms. Their food was brought up to them. So they couldn't even leave the room. And that's some of the restrictions that are put on NFL players, especially the night before the game. And not just the players. It's put on all the administrative and all the help staff that are traveling with the teams or that are with the team. So I know the NFL is trying to do, and I'm quite sure the other sports are trying to do everything that they can to prevent this or try to at least ease this up. But it just seems like with all these strict measures that the NFL has with the testing and everything else, to me, I think right now it's at an all-time high in the NFL with all these players that are sick or that are testing positive for COVID right now.
So is that what happened, that they were up too late?
I hope not. I hope not.
That was not a good game.
Yeah, well, we had 20 players between the flu and Doc. That's the other thing I wanted to ask you about was this flu, because from what I heard, I think we had like 8 players COVID, right? And then you had probably another 12 battling the flu. Well, I heard the COVID players were ready to go. It was the guys with the flu that were feeling so miserable to where they couldn't play. So, I mean, again, it's mild symptoms that they say this Omicron is, the symptoms are mild from the Omicron, but now you putting the flu on top of that. So is the flu compounding things? What is the flu now? What is this flu variant? What is this doing to things to hurt us right now?
Yeah, so great point. Flu is upon us. Remember last year we had a very mild flu season. Many people think it was, contributing to the use of masks a lot more strongly last year, and probably just in a sense the ongoing pandemic. Again, viruses kind of compete for hosts sometimes, and sometimes they can outcompete each other. But certainly wearing masks, and maybe people got flu vaccinations too last year at a little better clip or what have you. But we are seeing a little uptick. At Texas State, we've seen dozens of cases over the last month. About 2 weeks ago, we had 12 or 14 over 2 or 3 days. So, we had, and of course, we're always doing this, but we immediately reminded students and faculty and staff to remember to get the flu vaccine before they headed home as soon as possible. And really, just be careful with the same types of hand washing and other measures, because sometimes if you're dealing with a twin, they're calling it the twin-demic. If it happens, then you're trying to discern between two different viruses, which actually do act a little differently pathologically. So physicians have to be, kind of worried about that. So flu is absolutely here. It hasn't blown up yet, but it's something that can. So we're keeping a close eye on that. And then the other virus that we've been watching is it's called RSV, respiratory syncytial virus. Usually you see it with children, more dangerous with children, can cause, RSV is a virus that can cause croup and other it mimics the flu as far as symptomology, but it can be pretty tough on children. But if you're immunocompromised, it can be problematic too for adults. So there's always several kind of winter seasonal viruses that are in circulation, but influenza, we know, generally can become problematic if we didn't predict the right vaccine. So every year when you get that vaccine, you traditionally get 3 different strains in there, an A and a couple of Bs that are basically best educated predictions from the end of last year is what's going to be happening this year. And occasionally we miss it. And you've probably remember that over the years, where sometimes we'll have a worse flu season because we didn't quite predict the right the right virus that was coming out, and so we had poor coverage in the vaccine. So again, sometimes it is an best educated guessing game as we go into that season, and hopefully we'll be protected this year if that occurs. I still think the ongoing problem will be the SARS outbreak with COVID.
So this just brings up, I'm curious, in a normal year, how many players in a game get the flu, as opposed to COVID? Are we seeing more? Obviously, we're adding COVID on top of, so you're having more players who are out, and COVID we're treating, quite frankly, more seriously than we ever have treated the flu. Mm-hmm. But what would be a normal November, December game?
No, that's a great question, Deb, because I'll just go back to when I was playing. I think the year might have been 1993, and that was the year that Bruce Smith, he caught the flu, and it went through the locker room. I mean, they were getting ready to make a playoff run. Of course, Doc, that's when they were one of the 4 Super Bowls years that they went to. But it went through that locker room. And I remember Wayne Fonts, our coach back then, pretty much mandating that we had to get the flu shot, because they know, again, Dale, with you being in the locker room, which is close contact with guys, the nature of the game of football, that you could transmit the flu. And like I said, it might have been like 7 other players. Bruce Smith couldn't play in that game. It was a mess. And I remember Wayne, like I say, that you had to take the flu shot because, again, they didn't want that to spread throughout the locker room. Now you see where it doesn't affect it. You rarely hear about it now. A guy catching the flu. I'm just saying, before all this pandemic stuff happened, you rarely hear about a guy catching the flu and kind of affecting other guys in there, because what they'll do is, once they know someone may have the flu or may be sick, they're not even allowed to come over to the facility. They, like you said, Doc, they isolate them. They let them stay at home. They can't really come over to the facility. Now, that, again, the virtual part of football wasn't like how it is now because of this pandemic. But again, it only affected maybe 1 or 2 guys on the team back then, Deb. So you wouldn't hear about a whole bunch of outbreaks that happened other than that 1 year when it first happened to Bruce Smith. So I thought the NFL, and I think they did a great job of, like I say, pulling the guy out before he affected everybody else and kind of, keeping them away from the team, so that would prevent the spread of the flu. So, again, it seems like with this, Doc, with this COVID, it just seemed like they can't do that. I mean, I'm a little puzzled by why it wasn't done like that in the beginning of this. Just take the guys out like they did in the beginning to prevent the spread. But I guess this is a whole different animal we're dealing with the COVID.
Not entirely. You make a great point. I mean, it does take us back to, why can't we be better at preventing what's happening? I mean, in the sense, if we're doing our testing correctly and we're doing it regularly and we're isolating players, we should be a little bit better at it. So that begs the question: are we getting lax with testing, or is something going on with testing due to competitive edges? I have no idea, and I hate to even think that way. But is something going on where it's slipping in? Because otherwise, if you're testing regularly, especially with, now again, this gets into the weeds a little bit. If you're using certain types of tests, you can have some false results. If you're using rapid testing as kind of your go-to test, that can be a little problematic. Sometimes they're not as good as a PCR-based test, which takes a little bit longer. So it gets into some of that, but we certainly have the technology to test and know most of the time. I'm talking 90% or higher of the time with PCR testing if a person's truly positive, and then you should be isolating. The hard part of this is backing that wagon up and knowing when that person was first infected and how they might have been living with players or interacting with players before they had symptoms and things like that. And going back to the flu, I just think it's just such a different dynamic, kind of going backwards and thinking about the flu didn't have the same stigma. It wasn't political. I mean, people just tended to do this people just stayed home if they had the flu. Yeah. For one thing, they felt horrible. And another thing, they were trying to protect their teammates or whatever. It's just, for some reason, we seem to think that some individuals seem to think that maybe it's different. I don't really view it as different. I still think we could be doing a better job on that end. But again, that's my opinion. But I think it bodes well for viral transmission and prevention. It's not that difficult if you adhere to the principles of testing and contact tracing and following the rules. But here we are with all these players having issues. And I mean, again, we see it everywhere. We see it. My wife's a pre-K teacher. I've talked to other teachers. We're hearing reports now of people kind of just saying, well, why should I even report it? I'm just going to send the kid to school. I mean, really?
Yep.
Yeah.
Really? I mean, why would you do that as an individual, to put someone at, even if it's 10% or 1% chance that an elderly teacher is going to get it? Why in the world would you do that? Or a custodian in an NFL facility or anywhere else? Again, thinking about other people should be the primary goal, but it seems to be falling by the wayside for some. Again, I don't want to preach that this is a widespread problem, but it is a problem. I mean, it is a problem in at least a segment of the population.
Well, unfortunately, we start throwing on economics and childcare situations, and I need the job and all of that.
We've all been there.
You know, another thing I just wanted to point out as we get to final thoughts, because we want to all get back, is one of the things that I'm thinking as I listen to the two of you talk about the flu versus COVID, and while we have testing for COVID and we don't really have testing for the flu, when you've got the flu, you feel bad.
Yeah, you really do most of the time.
And when you've got COVID, you can be asymptomatic.
Yeah.
I mean, like you said, almost the team's ready to go. The COVID guys, we're ready.
Yeah.
It's the flu guys who are, you know, rolling around going, no, I don't think so.
Yeah. You know, another thing too that I'm really puzzled about, and it's kind of my deranged thinking, is like you heard about maybe one or two coaches getting it, but you're not hearing a lot about the coaching ranks. You're not hearing a lot, and they're around players. I mean, just as much as other players are. And, you know, I'm quite sure they are vaccinated, a lot of them. Yeah. But again, Doc, like we said, you can still catch it, you know, even if you're vaccinated. And I'm just not hearing, we know we got a lot of older coaches. I'm just not hearing a lot, which is a good thing. I'm not saying that as a negative. I'm saying this as a good thing. We're not hearing about a lot of assistant coaches getting, I think Mike McCarthy, you know, was the one coach, a big coach, right? Doc R down there in Dallas, he had it, and you know, but you're not hearing about a lot of assistant coaches, you know, getting this and stuff. So I don't know whether, you know, I'm deranged. I'm just thinking. So forgive me, Doc. Forgive me.
I just want to hear more about how deranged.
Yeah.
And what about the refs? And what about?
I mean, you're right.
They're on the field, right?
That's a great point, Deb. That is. I
stole it from Ray.
Yeah.
I bet some of those numbers are there. We're just not going to hear it as much as we do when it's, you know, Antonio Brown or unless it's a primary coach. I mean, I bet there's, and I'm sure the dynamics are that generally coaches are a little older than players, so maybe they're getting vaccinated a little more than a 25-year-old who thinks they're invincible. But I mean, it is a little troubling when you see some of the, I mean, you know, the Aaron Rodgers ordeal and some of that we had talked about trying to get on the show during that time just to talk about that, and it's just, you know, it's unfortunate. It's unfortunate when those things are going on. And I don't want to ever withhold somebody's ability to make an income or play the game they love or do the job they love. But let's be careful.
There's a balancing act there. There is a balancing act.
Yeah. And then the other thing was, you know, that's a great question. What Ray got, how can we get the VAC cards verified legally? I mean, because Antonio Brown, man, Doc, that was just so crazy. I just don't understand him, what he thinks about at times. They have just so much talent. That young man just has so much talent, but he does all these boneheaded things that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. Yeah. I mean, that just didn't. I'm hearing that he got vaccinated, but he still got a card or something. I'm just hearing it's just amazing to me. But you see, the league came down on him, and now when you talk to Bruce Arians, the head coach from Tampa Bay, they don't know if they're going to bring him back. They're still trying to make a decision as to whether they want to bring him back on the team whenever he's clear. So he just puzzles me with what he does sometimes.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I think when we start talking about vaccination cards, we have to understand we are so far behind the rest of the world in a lot of these things. We have a little paper card that somebody wrote on.
Yep.
And, you know, like if you're going to Europe or if you're going someplace, you need an EU certificate and it has to be reviewed. And we have records, but some states are better than others at keeping the records. When I was going to Europe, I was able to get an EU certificate because I proved that I was vaccinated, and I was able to do that so I could go do things. Not that I got to go because Omicron came out, but that's another story. So, final thoughts on this. Doc, what do you think, or what do you want to leave our listeners with?
Yeah, my final thoughts are go Cowboys.
I like it.
Man, they gave me a heart attack on Sunday.
I know.
Oh, yeah.
So my son-in-law is a huge Cowboys fan. That's one box you have to check to marry my daughter. And it was funny. We were both checking in on the game pre-wedding, and at one point I was like, hey, they're up 24-0. Sweet. And then I look up and it's like, what is happening with this team? But all joking aside, I think one of the things I'd like to leave our listeners with is what I've been telling a lot of people. There's no reason to panic. The virus, remember we've talked about this, viruses mutate. We're probably going to see, we may very well see another variant down the road, but we'll just see if that occurs. Again, leaving the world unvaccinated lets the virus continue to do this. So as soon as we have more vaccine equity around the world, including the United States, I think we'll see less and less of it. We shouldn't be panicking. We should continue to do what we're doing. If you're vaccinated, great, go get boosted. If you're boosted, outstanding. Continue to be smart about how you interact with people. Be careful still if you're in high-risk environments. Try to think about other people's health, even if you think you're, really well protected, and try to live your life. I think we're in a much better place than we were 1 year ago. We have lots of tools, we have lots of technology, and lots of ability to help each other. But we need to try to get on board as a nation and as a world and try to get this thing under control. I mean, we really have the tools in our hands now. It's just a matter if we're going to take advantage of those.
Yeah. Ditto, Deb. Ditto everything Doc just said.
Yep. I like the word vaccine equity. And I also think, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, I think just because you had it isn't the same as being vaccinated.
That's right. Data shows that.
Yes.
That absolutely shows that. In fact, Omicron right now, the data is showing that if you've had it and recovered, you are actually more likely to get Omicron than people that are fully covered. So there's this weird dynamic between Delta and it's getting into the weeds a little bit for geeky virologists like me, but there's actually some different dynamics between Delta and Omicron. So just because you've had it does not mean you're protected from all variants. That's kind of the take-home message. The vaccination is much better at protecting you over all variants.
That's why we get the flu every year.
That's right.
They're just variants.
That's right. It's hard to stay up.
So, while I would love to continue talking, I think it's time that everybody takes a little bit of a break. We will have to do this again.
Absolutely.
So I learned so much every single time.
Yes, absolutely.
I love this, and we didn't even get too much to, a lot of the issues. But check us out on SoundCloud, check us out on Spotify, check us out on YouTube and on Facebook and on sportslaw.com. And thank you, Doc, and thank you, Pro, for helping out with this tonight.
Absolutely. Thanks, Doc.
Yeah, thank you both. It's an absolute honor to be on your show, and you guys have a safe and blessed Christmas and happy holidays and New Year. And let's hope and pray we're in a different spot the next time we talk.
Amen.
You too.